Dun 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 dun. Welcome. It's Sunday morning. It's 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. and what time is it in Germany? It's 6 p.m. in Germany. Thanks, Alex. I have your mic muted, but I heard you here. And we're talking about rock and the art therein of rock. But before we start, every Sunday, right here, right now, this is where we're hanging out, talking about stuff to get your art happening. And I can't put that into the comments because Thingo's not talking to anyone right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into the chat. Boom. Diana, if you would be so good as to copy and paste stuff as I do this stuff, because Diana's the best and Diana helps me all the time. Yeah, Angelspit's Twitch. Follow Angelspit's Twitch, and because this is broken, I don't think I'm going to be able to do all this shit. This is made possible by Angelspit's Patreon. These people are here, and they keep me going. Thank you so much. And I will keep you going as well. And then, Diana, if you just want to copy and paste all of this stuff... Oh, fucking hell. I just don't think I could be fucked. We'll cover it next week. I tell you what, let's just jump straight into it because technology is sucking me. But there's one more thing I will say, and that is, if you like it dark, if you like it hardcore, if you like it constant, MTV TV, and we're streaming there later, it's the place to be. I hate fucking OBS today. Maybe I should stop having sex with OBS and everything would be just fine. Hi, everyone. How you doing? Julius, Alex, I love the way you're drinking beer. It's not beer?
It's just tea.
It's tea. Well, I love the way you're drinking tea. And if ever I want to drink at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to go, but it's 6 o'clock in Berlin, so fuck y'alls. Alex, while I've got you, you put forward a fantastic question about samplers and stuff.
Yes.
Go.
I have this wonderful sampler called the Electron Octatrack, and you basically can import your loops, your stems, and then mangle them up and cut them up and deform them, whatever. But one thing I was thinking about, if I maybe could prepare them in any way so they gel together better, because you can, if you want to just simply put your stems together and then have it like as a backing machine. And I was wondering if there may be some common sense things to do, like some EQ settings or like maybe low cutting or whatever, something like that.
Okay. I'm going to jump in first, if that's okay, with the Colosseum. No, the Palladium. The place where Greeks hang out and talk. Oh, no, that's Romans. Okay, sorry. So the first thing I'm going to do is... Forum. That'll do fine. Thank you. I'm going to suck everything below 50 cycles out of it. So I'll put a high-pass filter at 50, depending on what the sound is. If it's a mid sound, I might take 100 or 200 out. The thing to remember with the sampler is when you play it an octave lower, whatever's at 50 cycles suddenly becomes 25 cycles, and that's really low. That's insanely low, because 50 cycles is really low. And that's, samplers are great fun, but the thing to remember is the first thing you're going to do is you're going to play it like 3 octaves lower. And the sampler is going to be putting out that gurgle because it is extremely super low end. So I would be high passing it as drastically as you can or as you see fit. Once I've high passed it, I will put a pretty serious compressor. I'll normalize it. I'll put a compressor over it, maybe 3:1 at -9. So everything's going to be sitting up there and chunky. And if I have noise suppressant software or filters, I will then apply the noise suppressor filters. Speaking of Shea. And the objective is that once it's in there, when the sampler plays, you are hearing all of the sparkle and all of the information. I might do some tweaking on the wave file itself. I might, bring it up and make it a bit shinier here and there. Some samplers can do that, but the thing to remember is if you're going to do that internally, that's another algorithm, another synth engine being applied to filtering, and you might not want to use that synth engine. Oh, I'm sorry. And she just walked on my keyboard. So that's my life, and that's what I think about samplers. Grim, you got your hand up.
Today's technical difficulties are brought to you by Shea, the Space Cat.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, I know we kind of visit and dabble on it a lot about making a mix sound less muddy. But I also think for the sake of context and everything, it's like I may not be really savvy when it comes to a lot of the tech side of the synths like you're talking about. But I think don't overestimate the dBs on individual like stems when you lay them out, you know? If the decibels are jacked, I think that's what leads to a lot of stuff being muddy, because you got a lot of really awesome sounds, but if they're all competing at a similar decibel, they're just never going to hear it. So that's probably like the layman's knowledge, but I just think it's a good reminder. So you might have to have something all the way at like -18 dB and then up to like maybe -10 as a threshold, just to make sure that things are not stepping all over each other. That's all I got.
Excellent. I'm just going to jump in before my cat ruins everything. Muddy is an excellent word because muddy accurately describes a lot of things. You know, muddy, that sounds muddy. If something is muddy, it's usually warm around about 400 or 800. So another thing I'm going to do is I will pull 400 out of everything, like 6 dB at a kind of a maybe 1 or 2 octave kind of hole. 6 dB, because that's where your ear is listening to fundamental sounds, and that stuff's going to build up and your brain is looking for that stuff and it becomes muddy. So just pull it out there. Adam, talk to me while I turn off my camera.
Well, I think that is a perfect explanation of muddiness, man. That really gets down to the core. Grim, what you're talking about is kind of the difference between LUFS and decibel scale. Like loudness, like decibel scale is amplitude, but LUFS is loudness. And so when we talk about compression all the time, what we're usually talking about is less about decibels and more about using the decibel scale as a way to how do I say, to measure. It's kind of like LUFS is the way that you perceive it, and decibels is the way that you measure amplitude. So when we talk about compression, a lot of times decibels don't, like your decibel settings, like you know, the math of it doesn't always kind of make sense, right? Because like you can have tracks that have a great amount of decibel amplitude because they have so much amplitude in a particular frequency range, but in the other frequency range, it doesn't sound loud, if that makes sense. So okay. You know what Karl is saying about sculpting it out, like getting those low frequencies out is a huge way of getting rid of a lot of decibel pressure, because that's what it really is pressure, out of that, so that you can compress or amplify, you know, create more loudness with the frequencies that you want. The thing we were talking about last week, right, about, or was it last week or 2 weeks ago, about
does this have to do with samplers, because we're talking about samplers now?
Well, it does, because we're talking about compressing for samplers.
Okay.
And so you know, the thing that I will always caution against is like over compressing, right? Because as Karl says, if you compress those frequencies in those, you know, those 400, 800, 16 range, you get more of the mud, right? And that's because you're not carving away the stuff around it. And so, you know, what Karl was talking about, using the multi-band compression, I think using multi-band compression on individual samples is a really good thing to do, because you can really get a better sense of the loudness in the different frequency ranges. And that's kind of where I was going with all that, Karl.
All right, cool. Thank you, Adam. No, awesome. See, that's a really interesting point, because like, you know, I think it's important to have your wave files at pretty close to 0 dB, like minus 0.1. 0.1, that's what I normalize everything to. And then once I'm in my software, I'll pull all that stuff down. But Aaron, you do brought up an important point, and that is that in a sampler, people usually, myself included, forget to turn down the volume because, samplers only have so much headroom. Yeah, I don't know. As far as multi compression, maybe. I mean, if it sounds good, do it. But it's funny, since like the other week, my whole mindset's just totally turned around on multiband compression. Like, I've seen the light. And I've got, it's interesting because I'm now getting these remixes in and I'm hearing, it's like, dude, you so used a fucking multiband on that. Like, I can just hear it. It sounds like, butter that's been pushed so hard into bread that it's ripped all the bread up. But that's what I think anyway. But anyway, I would like to talk about samplers more. Adam, you've got your hand up. Go.
Just to follow up real quick on that, like re-emphasizing what you were saying about carving out the important frequencies. So before you do the normalization, you should do your equalization and your sculpting work before you do the normalization and make it all loud, if that makes sense. Because
cool.
otherwise you're just making frequency, like, information louder. Like, it's that whole thing I was saying before, whereas if you have frequencies where there's more sound pressure, more decibel level, if you cut that away, then when you normalize everything, like, instead of it boosting all those frequencies and everything else being here, now you can bring everything like that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying.
You're doing good. Rob, what you got?
Yeah, I typically don't do any effects on the waves before I suck them into a sampler. The only thing I would do is trim. If it's from a computer and I've captured a wave file from a recording device or another sampler, then I'm all about getting the sound quality that I want from that source first. So if it's coming from an LP or a DAT tape or a reel-to-reel or a little hand recorder or some shit like that, or your phone, the first thing I'm going to focus on is, trimming the sample that I'm from the source recording, or if it's like a bass guitar, I'm just going to play a note. I'm going to capture that, trim it, and save off the raw wave file on my computer, or I'm plugging straight into a sampler direct. In which case, the first thing you obviously got to do is check your levels, make sure that you're getting what you want to record in terms of the sample length, and adhering to the memory limitations of your sampler. But once I've done that, I'm all about using that sampler to create a new sound design. So it's either about changing the resolution, the sample rate, so going up or down, like crunching it, if you like, or it's using one of the built-in modulation algorithms that are in that sampler. So, for example, the Korg Triton Pro with the MOS board in it has about 8 different algorithms that I can use to process a sample from. And the Yamaha EX5 has about 6 or 7 algorithms that I can choose from to remodulate that sample. And then depending on which device I go for, whether it's an analog digital or all digital, it'll have some effects built in. So it'll have a digital delay in stereo, or it'll have some other series of effects that I can apply after I've sampled. And that's where the experimentation comes in. I will go through all of those.
Thanks,
That's
Rob.
me.
I didn't mean to cut you off. What you just said, if I can now absolutely backtrack on everything I just said, I really agree, and I'll thank you for saying that you sample off reel-to-reel LP and DAT. Like, you are hardcore of hardcore. I really am trying so hard to get back into sampling. Like, I have to force myself to do it because it's hard. It's difficult, but it's so rewarding. Like, doing all this sound design and everything on your computer is so much faster, so much easier, and so much more boring. Whereas if you sit on a sampler, you're opening yourself up to all of these mistakes, and shit that you can't do, so you have to think around. And my point being is that I'll echo that there is just something magic about chucking the sound in the sampler and then making sure it's normalized, maybe not even compressing.
And the dynamic range, in the dynamics in general of a retro synth are nothing like what's on your laptop or your computer, especially when you arc it up in the studio and you feel the vibrations. You're getting frequencies and harmonics that you wouldn't necessarily get through your clean digital signal processing. And every device is different. I could sample through an EMU device and Karl samples through his EMU device. They sound similar, but they're not the same because the circuits are not the same. There's degraded, there's capacitor issues, there's noise ingest, there's little finicky idiosyncrasies in the analog circuitry that gives an instrument character. And that's what you're looking for when you're sampling into those devices, is you're looking for those unique tones. To be honest, the worst one that I have is the DSS-1, and it sounds awesome, especially when you crank it up. Why I say it's the worst one is because it's so old that the methodology for creating the samples takes fucking ages, because you've got to break it across all of the sets of the keyboard. You've got to build, sounds upon sounds upon sounds. It takes a long time, but once you get the technique down and you're going to use it a lot, the old Korg circuitry sounds freaking awesome, and you can't beat it. And one of the things that I've been playing with is sampling through samplers. So take one sound through one device, muck with it a little bit, save that off to my multi-track hard drive recorder. So I've got the Korg DSS-1 instance of it plus the source instance. Then I'll take both of those instances, run them into the Yamaha EX5, which is a stereo sampler, and I can do side-by-side sampling on both channels and export that to my multi-track recorder. And I start building up a library of samples that I've processed out through and through in series or some in parallel. And basically you can spend all day doing that. You can go around in circles. You can go back into the original sampler and try a different modulation technique. Sound design is fun, and it should be.
Thank you. If I could jump in, if that's okay. It's interesting what you said about that. The technology used on an old sampler is radically different to what's used now. Like, for example, the DSS-1 and the Emaxes and the Emulator 2s, they are non-aliased. So that what's actually happening is that if you want to have the sound played an octave lower, it will actually just stretch the sound out. And instead of it being a 44.1 output, it's going to be 22.05. So it's going to be literally stretching it out. Whereas a modern sampler is going to get it, make a recalculation, and output that recalculation. This is like mechanical. And as a result, the sounds you get in the lower register are way different. I also wanted to touch on, that I always go back to real gear because the frequency response is drastically different. When you look at the mathematical calculation at 44.1, because most MP3s are 44.1, yes, there's 96K, but if I'm doing a high amount of frequency modulating on a modular synthesizer, or fucking up some of this old stuff, the frequencies involved and the shape of the curvature of the sound can't be captured at 44.1. 96, yes, probably to a large degree, but you're not going to get the harmonics that are being created. And sure, you might not hear those upper partials, but it's the way they are manipulating that bass frequency. And also, Emax's unintentional distortion is bloody lovely. Like, you can go into the sound and you can turn it up 20 dB, and nothing has distortion like an Emax. It's just luscious. That's it. Adam, go.
Well, so several of the things that you guys have said made me think a little bit about some of the historical uses of the samplers. Like, Karl, you had mentioned the limitation and time stretching, and Rob had mentioned, sampling off of records and tape and all that. And one of the things that was in the foundations of hip hop production there, like Dre used a lot. So what they would do is they would, because the sampler only allowed you a few seconds of sampling time, to get longer, to get like 4 bars or 8 bars of a sample off a record, they would spin up the record by hand, so it would be going faster than the motor would carry it, and then they would record the sample and do that until you get the right kind of to get the, and then time stretch it to slow it back down. And that's where those fantastic like Public Enemy breaks come from. And like I said, Dre used that trick a lot. So going back to the very old school with the early MPCs and the Akai S series stuff, that was the way that they would create those incredibly fat beats, because they would speed up the record, sample it, and then slow it back down, and you would get that like chunk that Karl's talking about by slowing down the samples, by time stretching the samples. It's pretty great.
Rob, what you got? Thank you, Adam.
Cheers.
Yeah, you're talking about the aliasing. So one of the cool things about the old keyboards, and you can do the same thing with some of the newer ones, is when I have to sample if I'm sampling an instrument into the DSS1, then I would have to hit a note, every octave, and record all, it would set up the tonality across that octave automatically. But I've got to record each tone in to each octave. Now the cool thing is that the benefit of having that approach and not having the super smart DSP5 where it doesn't try to stretch it, having the aliasing, the good thing is that you can break up your keyboard and you don't have to use the same technique when you record each tone, when you're hitting a key in each octave. So you can add things like aftertouch and be more aggressive down low or up high on the keyboard range. You don't have to be consistent across the whole keyboard. And by doing that, it's almost like introducing more human element into the instrument. It's like if I bang the drum and then I tap the outer rim of the drum, I get 2 different sounds, but it's the same drum. You can do the same thing with any instrument. You can slap the bass, you can pluck the bass, you can not hold the string on the fret accurately, you can let it reverberate, and you can capture all of those little subtle changes across different parts of the keyboard, so it doesn't sound boring and consistent. It sounds like it's more human in the loop, if that makes sense. That's a benefit of doing the breakout samples per octave on the keyboards.
That's amazing. Look, Aaron, the floor is yours. Go. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I was going to say, to follow on that, Rob brought up an interesting point. It's like, more and more, it's like, I think, you just got to explore what you can mess with and what you can get out of it. A particular artist that I dig on as far as process is Grimes, and a lot of her kind of mentality is, well, I'm going to grab this and see if I can do something with it. And I got a repeater, so maybe I could do something with this. Or I'm not a proficient bass player, but I could play this riff. And maybe if I get it on a loop, it'll get progressively better, So it gets to the point where it's just piecework, but it's very, very Dr. Frankenstein, which I'm sure everybody has a little bit of that going. But instead of being like, oh man, I got to buy that brand new synth, or oh, I got to break the bank to do X. You may find some really badass stuff in just what you have. Like in particular, I love stuff that messes with vocals, and there's entire kits that are just they're more mechanical, that you can literally just jam an aux jack into and have the mic and just start smacking through the pedals and turning knobs, and you could hear all of these different tonalities. So it's badass, it's just trying to find the fun in doing it again. You know what I mean? Because I think Karl spoke to that, to where you're just sitting at a computer screen and you're like, tell me things, show me things, instead of just, having more of a hands-on approach. So I guess what I'm getting at is try the unconventional and start screwballing around with stuff to where you don't have to be a master of that thing. You don't have to be a master of playing a drum or playing a guitar, but yeah, you may be able to do some pretty cool shit with it, So.
Yeah, looping's a bit different to just single note sampling, and the good thing about doing looping through different sampler synths is that you can take advantage of their filters. Like, if you don't have a 24 dB filter that sounds good on your computer, then just switch over to some hardware that does have the 24 dB filter and resample that loop, so you can use that as a break or a fill or something like that.
Thank you. There's a bunch of things I want to pick up on here. Adam, thank you about the importance of limitation. Once again, like, that's why I love a sampler. It's like you have 30 seconds to make a song. So every sound that you have is in that 30 seconds, and that includes the loops for the pads or whatever it is you're doing. And then when you listen to old Skinny Puppy or Ministry or Frontline Assembly, when you used to sample things and get away with it, the samples off the TV are short, really short and really low quality, because that's what you've got to squeeze in. And I'm sure there's some way, like, I don't want people to go, oh, I've got to go out and get a sampler. There's ways you can do this on a computer. So if there's some way that you can, set up limitation, like only say, I'm only going to use 30 seconds of sound, and it doesn't have to be luscious quality sound. It can be 16K at 8-bit sound. See what happens, because everybody goes, man, I love old Ministry and I love old Skinny Puppy, and then they sample everything and record everything at these crazy high rates and do all the shit that we're talking about right now, and they go, why doesn't it sound anything like it? I put a bit crusher on it and I put distortion on it. But the thing you got to remember is that there is actual noise. In those samples are noisy. Everything about it was noisy, and the noise, the literal humming of the fucking instrument is what's making it gritty. Just on a personal note, I may have mentioned this last week. I'm getting a really simple, cheap Boss distortion pedal, like a DS1 or something, to run off the Emacs, because my desktop, for those who don't know, is oh my god, I've forgotten his name, from Skinny Puppy, who tragically passed away in the early 90s. Fuck, I forgot. Anyway, it's Dwayne Gotel, standing at his Emacs and his at his Mirage, and all of his distortion pedals are lined up, and it's so inspiring to me, because that was what got everybody into this, was I'm going to get a shitty sound out of a shitty sampler and run it through a distortion pedal. And the cool thing about that is, if I'm running a guitar or anything else through it, I play different chunks of samples of guitars or drums or something, run it through the distortion and see what happens. My brain isn't wired to be able to think about, oh, how would I do this and what's it going to sound like, which is something about a computer that sort of dulls me, or maybe it's my computer setup that sucks. But It's like, how do I set this up to make mistakes? Oh, hey, wow, that was cool. What happened? The thing about a lot of computers is that there's not really that room, or maybe I'm not set up right, I don't know. The other great thing about a sampler is it's a phone-free zone. It's an internet-free zone. You know, I put my fucking phone outside the room and just sit there and work on the damn sampler, and I am free. I am not plugged. It's like watching a VHS tape. You can't hit pause and go over and click fucking Facebook. You're free. You are unplugged. And my last thing is, we were talking about looping. Looping is a rabbit hole that I would love to go down. Listening to the old Depeche Mode and Peter Gabriel, what Mr. Gabriel did with a Fairlight and what Depeche Mode did with emulators and Fairlights, and the way that the loops weren't good. They were terrible. But they inspired songs. Like if you listen, I think it's Peter Gabriel 3. I don't know what songs are on the album. I've got the vinyl downstairs. It's like it's the one where his face is melting. It's like what's happened in that is insane. Like there's bad sampling all over it that has inspired music, and it's great. And then listen to Last Temptation, because that was just like an S950 and a Prophet 5 and some of his friends. It's insanity. But like Depeche Mode used to do this great thing where they'd get a bell sample, dung, like that, dung, but they'd cut it here and loop it. So it would go dung, 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 dung. When they played it down low, it would go dong, 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 and low it would be dong, dong. So and then they put a really slow decay on it, so it had delay on it. Dung 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 dung. So as they played it, the delay was different as they played it across the keyboard. The lower they went, the longer the decay became. The higher they went, the shorter it became. You know, I don't think about doing that anymore because I'm so spoilt with automatically pushing a button and oh look, it loops perfectly. And that's boring. Alex, go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think even if you just use the sampler in your DAW, just by bouncing out a section and putting it back into the sampler, just by playing your audio, you can get results that are much more lively and different than what you have by just drawing in the MIDI and having your software synths directly put it out. I think at least for me, it was like, it's always really nice.
Totally agreed. Thank you. Rob.
Yeah, I agree that using the computer it's a clinical interface. You kind of know what you're doing already and you're going to go and do it all, and I find it very boring to use the computer, and you get those pop-up interruptions and all that sort of shit. The good thing about computers is you've got the ability to go trim your waves, analyze the waves in minute detail on a large screen that sucks on a sampler. You can save off any number of variations on the computer. So you build up your own library of sound fonts and wave files to use with whatever devices you want. So that's great. The other good thing about the PC with sampling, or the Mac, is most old devices don't do wavetabling. And wavetable software on the PC, it totally rocks, because you get the full visualization, you can plan it all out, you can muck around and experiment with wavetables, and I have a lot of fun using wavetables on the computer, which I don't really get on my synths. Sure, there are synths out there that do all of that, but I don't have them, and I'm not going to buy them because I'm happy with the software plugins that I have in my DAW to do that. And that includes vocals. Doing a lot of variation using wavetables for your vocal recordings, it's kick-ass. It is a bit more experimental, but for the rest of it, I would prefer just to use physical hardware, just for the same point that Karl mentioned. Over.
Thanks, Rob. Adam, what you got?
I was just kind of wondering, like, quick show of hands, does anybody else use Reason for the software for creation? I'm a Reason head myself, and okay, so I think, you know, when I hear you guys, I mean, like, you know, no diss on the hardware stuff. I've played with a lot of hardware; it's great. I don't really feel like I have the computer boredom that you guys are talking about because I use Reason, and like it gives me a lot of knob fiddly fun, and like, you know, some of the tracks that I've done I've just created because of crappy things that I can make Reason do, the kind of things that you're talking about, the feedback, the noise, the, you know, running things through, like running weird things through other things and resampling, and, you know, of course the samplers in Reason are just amazing. That's what they started as, was sampling. So I don't know, I feel like you know, like Reason with a good control surface or two can really open up the whole computer music thing, that in the way that you guys are talking about with the hardware synths. Like I find great joy in Reason because it has so many twiddly things, and like, you know, you literally flip it around in the visualization of the thing, like the racks of it, and it's like, you know, looking at Karl's patch bays, you know, you can do all the control voltage and rewire everything into different ways to control sound. And it, you know, I think what I'm trying to get at there is that I think it really depends on what you're using when it comes to the computer software stuff, because, like, you know, recording into a multi-tracker is just recording into a multi-tracker. That makes the computer no more interesting than like tape. But when you're working with software that's, you know, it's not just, you know, it's like real synthesis, you know what I mean? It's real synthesis. It's just using a digital brain, if that makes sense. And so I don't get that computer boredom that y'all are talking about. I don't feel like, you know, I don't feel like I'm working in little squares.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll just before I throw to you, Mark, I'll say thank you, Adam. So if you want to screw around with these things, it sounds like Reason's the way to go. Because like Emaxes are horrendously expensive. Mark, talk to me.
Hey. Yeah, so first of all, Adam, are you sponsored by Reason? Are you sure? 'Cause I think you mention Reason every week.
No, I freaking wish. No, but the thing is that's what I do on my work, and I started using it in version 2.5, and it was not a DAW then. It was just sampling and synthesis.
Yeah.
And I literally learned my way around synthesis using learning my way around Reason. It's very complicated software.
Yeah, I got a free trial for Reason once, and I looked at it, and I was just like, I feel like this is very powerful, but I have no idea what I'm doing, and then I forgot about it.
I bought books about, you know, big ass books about it, like several of them, just to learn my way around Reason, to learn all about, you know, the different types of synthesis. And I'm gonna tell you, like, you know, I can jump on here and talk with y'all and this kind of thing, and I messed with hardware stuff, especially in the early days, but like once I got onto Reason, I was just kind of like, this is just the most awesome thing I have ever seen. So you hear me talk about Reason a lot because it's what really unlocked my ability to create, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I was really just poking fun at you.
Yeah, no, but like, you know, the thing is I really just love it that much. I mean, I wish that I had sponsorships from Reason, because I mean, I could use the money, but but I just waved the flag because it's just that cool.
Good on you.
But I do get the whole idea of preferring the hardware approach to the software approach, because what little I have done, I have found that doing things with VSTs is definitely cheaper, but I do appreciate the physicality of a synth, like the ones I have actually spent money on. Possibly way too much. It does feel better, but I understand it. the appeal.
Again, I say if you're using Reason with a good control, see the feel of the control surface is one thing. A cheap control surface feels like a cheap control surface. You know, if you're using high-end control surfaces with the software, you can really tweak it so you get all that knobby feeling. And like I said, Reason's just different that way. It's not VSTs, it's synthesizers. It's like, you know, your control surface is the thing that you play on. The brain in your synthesizer and the brain in your computer are not all that different. It's what software it's running. And so when you use the control surfaces with Reason, I mean, one of the things that drove me crazy back in the early 90s when I was learning my way around MIDI and sampling keyboards, the Ensonics and that kind of shit, is that the windows were like this freaking big, and you're like 6 menus deep in the thing, and you hit one wrong key and it screws up and then you have to find the stupid thing in the sub menu that's, you know, drove you crazy. So the advantage to computer-based synthesis now, and I'm not talking about DAW, I'm not talking about VSTs, I'm talking about synthesis. The difference there is that you have this all laid out. You know, you can really, you know, in the case of like Karl with the, you know, patch cables and control voltage and, you know, running this audio to that and making it do the other thing. Like, you can do all of that right there in Reason. It's like literally laid out in that way, and it makes a lot of sense. If like looking at Karl's rig makes sense to you, Reason will make sense to you. If you are used to using something like Pro Tools or you know, real real consoles, then it will all make sense to you because it is all designed from that very analog perspective. But you have this incredibly powerful brain that is more powerful than the brain than you can put into your like your synthesizer has a dedicated little brain, and that's all it does is that, you know, and your computer has a much more powerful brain. And so, yes, analog chipsets and that kind of thing. Analog stuff is analog, and it's always going to have analog character, bottom line. But once you're talking about, you know, into the 90s and that kind of thing, when it's really, when you get into more, you know, like the synthesizers themselves are digital, then you're not really talking about a great deal of difference between using a good control surface and you know, computer synthesis. You know, you can really, like, if you'll pardon my French, you can really fuck it up in Reason. Like, it is very performable, and you can record the whole time. I mean, like I said, I've created some amazingly beautiful melodies out of pure squelch. You know, if you listen to the how to Train Your Robot stuff that I did there, like all that weird feedbacky squelch whistly stuff, that's all just from like woo, 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 making feedback through the filters and playing with knobs on a control surface.
Thank you, Adam.
Right
Mark, was there something else you wanted to add in there?
Oh, no, I was really just poking fun at Adam, and then I wanted to mention that I understand the appeal of having a physical thing to mess around with.
Excellent. And once again, good choice on your physical things to mess around with, because they're sexy as hell. You did good. You did good. Vince, I don't know who's first. It's either Vince or Rob. I'm going to put you in the Thunderdome with chainsaws and you can figure it out.
It's Rob. By the way, fun fact, I'm pretty sure the hands stay in the order they were put up for future reference.
All right, so so it gets pushed down?
Like for me, it's Rob, Vincent, and then there are no hands after that.
So Rob's first?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Rob, hit me with your rhythm stick.
Yeah, I get what you're coming from, Adam, and I don't disagree. I mean, PCs are unlimited in terms of what you can do with the software and all that sort of shit. I think the only difference that I'm suggesting is just for sampling, because I would prefer, I always use a wave editor, real simple thing like Audacity, just to trim and analyze and do all that sort of shit. And it's easy, it's simple. I don't have to learn the tool. It's simple to use. If I look at Reason, I'm not going to go to Reason for sampling personally because it's a big tool to learn. If I grab one of my hardware synths, I know what they can and can't do. And that's what's really interesting. Yeah, I know. I can see what you're saying. I'm not talking about the effects. I'm not talking about adding processing after your sampling. What's really interesting is that the most synths don't advertise what they can and can't do with their samples. And if you look at the Mirage, and it has some really boring presets, it doesn't give you any face value of what you can actually make with a Mirage or an ESQ1. It's deceiving. And as you learn your instrument or your software, you discover stuff. And when you sample and play with the parameters for sampling, you discover stuff. And I would say that Reason has somewhat unlimited capabilities in that regard. But for me, it's a lot to learn. I'm a simple-minded guy. So if I take the DSS-1, I know exactly what it can and can't do. And then I've got to play with it to find out what it can and can't do that's not documented. And that's part of the fun stuff. Reason is like, you need a book. So, yeah, and it takes time to learn all that sort of stuff. I can learn one instrument a lot faster than learning something like Complete or Massive.
Thanks, Rob.
May I be interrupting Adam real quick?
Really short. Really short.
I will be really, really short. The only thing that I want to say is, like, I get where you're coming from. It is a learning curve. That said, it's Reason doesn't really advertise the capability of its samplers either. The capability of the samplers in Reason are amazing, and if the shit you have all sitting around you makes sense to you, man, Reason ain't far. It's not a huge leap. It's really just what do they call it and where do they keep it.
Excellent. Vince, just before I throw it to you, thank you very much. The diversity that we've got here is great because, you know, there's people who are into computerized stuff and people who are into tape and people who are into analog, and it's really great that you know, we have this diversity of creative approach. Vince?
Yeah.
You are my Gandalf, Vince. I wrote you a song. Do you want to hear it? Vince, you are my Gandalf. You wear a pointy hat, and I'll be your hobbit with my other 3 friends. And then we'll walk up into a mountain and throw some little guy in and watch him burn to death in the lava. And then you can get the eagles, and we'll go back to the elves and do lots of drugs.
Encore!
Hey, what's that behind you, Karl?
Fuck off. It's your mum. Vince?
See, and you, Karl, that's a cardinal sin, though. You did that on the internet, so now that's up for remixes and streaming.
Go get it.
Gonna be on MTV TV.
Do it. Vince, you will be immortalized through my song. Go.
I'm a little bit on both sides of the hardware software stuff because, like, I don't use synthesizers for hardware, but I recently got this thing.
Woo!
Which is a sampler and sequencer and all of that in the software and in the hardware, so it's got a display in both places. So it's like some kind of weird matrixy plug this thing in and read it off a display thing. But the physical tactile control over the digital processing that I'm doing is actually really helpful sometimes. Especially like now anyway, since I just got this a few months ago. And guitars. You can sample guitars all day, but something about playing them into the mix and gives it that much more humanizing to the track when you make things as mechanical as I do. so I understand both sides of it. The software is incredibly powerful, but I get, like, if you're used to a hardware setup, you want that physical control. That's what you're comfortable working with. I get that too, because sometimes I don't even plug stuff in. I just sit in here and play my guitar and then go, oh, I should be recording stuff. I unplug entirely, but not. So there's value in both sides of it.
For sure. Thanks. And once again, man, really well done on, like, your output and everything. Is I think you're kicking our asses as far as all the shit you're putting online. So good on you, Vince. Keep it up.
Well, I'm disabled and my kids aren't in school right now, so I ain't got shit else to do. I sit around all day and invent posts for social media, and then I go to the studio for a couple hours. That's my days right now.
Life is good. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, for me, it's more like, I think you can't compare playing guitar directly with sampling a guitar note and then playing it over the keyboard. I like the sampling approach because it doesn't sound like a real guitar. It has like this artificial note of it, and it sometimes feels like hyper real and like cartoonish. And I think that's a really nice feature. Yeah, and I also wanted to say something about hardware and software, but I forgot. I think the biggest drawback is the mouse, but also, like, I think there's value in each approach. Like, just the way you interact with something has an effect on the results. So I think both are like the best, and whatever you can work with.
For sure. Thanks, man. Rob, I want to go after you. What you got?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question because, just to interrupt your train of thought, but the parameterization of samples is interesting topic too, and what I mean by that is Vincent showed the machine, and you look at the complete suite and how they parameterize samples and put them into digital instruments. That is super sophisticated, and I think there's still a lot of things in the future to improve on in terms of getting sampling to more intelligently understand what instrument you're playing and how to capture characteristics and harmonics and all sorts of stuff. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave my question till later.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to add, I mean, like, this sounds like a fun question. I don't mind continuing down the rabbit hole of samplers. There's something I love doing on the Emacs as well, is taking fragments of sounds. Like getting a guitar riff that is just click, 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 not compressed, not distorted, it's just shitty guitar. I need to get a guitar. And cutting out notes. This one's 3 notes, this one's 2 notes, and actually combining them together. So putting that first 2-note phrase on C, then that 3-note phrase on D, and then a 4-note on E, and then a 1-note on F. So you're actually playing different notes on it. And you're actually changing the order. And then you do that as well with access to, vocals. Excuse me. And you get into some really cool, fun things, because like my whole thing here is that I prefer these tools myself personally because they allow me not to think, and they allow me to come up with mistakes and to do things that I would not think of, and oh fuck, that's cool factor. And it's funny that the more I move away from like that ecthos, the more my music becomes stagnant. And someone was talking before about, sampling stuff, and like, man, I'm telling you, everyone needs an egg. Egg. You need egg. And also a clap track. Because, putting that shit into your music just makes it pop. Rob, if you want to take over and keep talking about that thing that you were talking about.
It was just more of a mind wandering, because I was just thinking about Junkie XL and the fact that he sold pretty much his entire collection of hardware synths and just bought acoustic instruments and percussive instruments that he plugs into his sampler. And, you know, going back to what Adam was saying, if you had one tool, which would it be? Like that, choose a keyboard or an instrument to a deserted island, what would it be? And Junkie basically wanted to get back to the grassroots of sampling real sounds and learning things like the cello and the violin and the double bass and drums, kettle drums and all the rest of it. Because he does motion picture soundtracks, and instead of getting lost in a ginormous library of samples, he would just rather go make them on the fly and process them and stick them in the song. And his workflow, you know, drove him to simplify how he captures sounds and uses sounds. And yeah, I'm interested in people's workflows, because if you're a DJ and you sample vinyl and you use a certain bit of software to sample vinyl, what's really interesting is that I know guys who create vinyl records of synth music just so DJs can sample it and remix it. It seems like a long way to go about doing something, but they love using the LPs and physically going through that process. And it seems odd, but to actually produce LP, to produce vinyl just for that industry because of their workflow, it's totally intriguing to me. And it's not what I would normally do, because I'm not a DJ, but I'm interested in everyone's approach to sampling and their pipeline. What do they use sampling for? How do they use it? And why is it good for them? Over.
Thanks. Can I, okay, Aaron, I see your hand. I want to jump in after you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make it quick. I mean, I think there's enough, I think there's enough talent and there's enough people within kind of like this atmosphere that you got on Zoom and everything else. So, I mean, like, I don't know, instead of maybe taking a long windy path to try to find all your samples online, I would try to suggest maybe have a cache of samples or make a wish list of shit that you would like people to say. And hell, maybe you could pull those to use in your samples and your music if you're a sampler type of person. You know what I mean? Like, if you have different artists here say different phrases or whatever, I think that'd be pretty kick-ass. Like, if you said, if you need a sample for a song where it says, that's great, but it needs more distortion, you could literally just have somebody record that, you know, and maybe that could yield results to where you just build up a cache of a sample library within this group. That's just my coin toss idea.
Awesome. If I could just jump in there, one thing that I have a problem with specifically is too many sounds. And I have a lot of old libraries on zip disks and on CD-ROMs for the emulators and all that shit. And it's really curious how I'm noticing that I'm going back to similar sounds because they're really good. I will always go back to the Fairlight Series 2 samples because they are really good. And I will always go back to the Emulator 2 library because they're really good. The whole ethos and the pride in creating sounds, it was different then, not necessarily better, but more inspiring to me, like it more on my page. But as Rob was, hinting at, something I really want to get into, besides using Adam's awesome drum loops that are on, you should put that in the messages in the chat here, and Diana, if you could put that live. Yeah, Adam's got some great loops there. Is going back with a microphone and recording stuff, because I miss the days when I would spend a day with a microphone. I've said this before, sampling shit, and then I would pull them into the samplers, process them up, create sounds, and then build songs from those samples. I miss those days because it was fresh. And it was when there was no, industrial music didn't have, you have to have all of this stuff going on. It was fresh and it was free, and I miss that so much. Adam, go.
There we go. Just fulfilling the request there to get the loops collection there. So I'm gonna jump in on Rob's question there about the sample records there, and I can babble down this, so stop me if I get too far. Couple of things that I want to say before I get going on this is what I want to make a quick distinction about for what I'm going to talk about is that, number one, there are DJs that play records, and then there are DJs that treat the turntable as an instrument, and that's what I'm going to be talking about is turntablism. The other thing that I want to talk about is the difference between sampling, which is sampling from another source of recording, right? Sampling off of a record, as opposed to field recording, which is a process that involves using samples of audio, but is field recording. Sampling in what I'm talking about is specifically sampling from another recorded piece of audio. So with DJ records for turntablists, what you're going to find is that there are beats records, right? Beats and breaks. So some of those are classic beats, and some of those are new that have been created specifically for the purpose of being used in this sort of Creative Commons kind of way. One of the, like what you were talking about specifically, Rob, was people creating records with sounds on them specifically to be used to produce music. And so I'm going to talk about one particular DJ because I buy a lot of his records for that reason, because he makes them for people to use them the way that he does, and that's DJ Woody. Exactly the way you would expect it, W-O-O-D-Y. Look up this dude. Look up the stuff that he does. He is an innovator in the turntablism genre. I don't know what you would call it. He does tone play, and so what we're doing these days with records like that is we use the scratch techniques, and we learn how to do scratching on the old school and fresh, right? Like the reason that we all use and fresh samples so much in DJing, wiki fresh, that kind of, is because those are the best samples to learn all of the basic patterns that you're going to create your creativity out of. It's basically the same as learning your scales on an instrument, right? You have to teach your hands how to play these patterns. It's like learning rudiments on the drums. And in fact, if you play paradiddles on the drums, it's very, very similar to a 2-click orbit. What we then do with records like what you're talking about and what Woody makes, right? So all right, so two things. One is juggling beats, right? Where you have beats on this record, beats on that record, and you carve them apart, and you can turn them into an entirely different beat by using your hands in the crossfader, juggling the beats. Then there's tone play. And tone play is where we start to get more creative and create musical passages out of something that's on the wax, right? So you might have a sample on this that is a horn or a guitar line. Some of them are arpeggiated lines. Some of them are just long tones. Now you can take a long tone and start manipulating that tone on the turntable, and instead of it being ba, it becomes ba, right? And you can take arpeggios and you start breaking them up. So instead of it being ba da 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 da, now it's ba da 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 da. You can do all these kind of things just using the turntable and the wax and the crossfader as an instrument. And that's very deep in the hip hop culture.
So is that the control surface you're talking about, or are you using the
Techniques
turntables?
1200, man. We're talking about records on a turntable, and so the sample records themselves. If you give me 2 seconds, I can run into the other room and grab a couple. I have quite a I don't have I'm going to say this. There are guys out there that have collections of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sample records. I'm in the dozens, because I like the really pretty ones. You know what I mean? I pick a handful because I'm like, I really like that one, you know?
Yeah, that's cool. I appreciate that, Adam, because it's certainly a unique field of music which is growing. And what my first experience was a DJ here wanted to get some tips for her door, and she said, "What do you think of the composition of my track? I'll send it to you." It was 45 minutes long. It was this massive club mix. I went, "Oh my God, overload. I can't deal with this." But yeah, I get it. Cool.
So you know what I'll do is I'm gonna look up a couple of links real quick for DJ Woody so that you can see what this dude does live with a turntable.
If it's okay, I'm just gonna move over to Vince. What's going on? Talk to me.
All right. He said he was curious to know about what people do for sampling and stuff, and then Alex, I believe it was, said something about how sampling guitars and playing it on the keyboard is not the same. Like, you can't really equate the two, and that's true, and that's why I use guitars not sampled sometimes, because that's what I want out of it. Sometimes I want the fully mechanical feel to the whole track, and then in that case I don't. I will then sometimes record it and use the samples, but like, I don't have an actual sampler, like a physical sampler. I use software to do my sampling, whether it be field recordings or pulling something from another recorded sound. Other recorded sounds I generally make sure they're already cleared royalty-free samples that I get from sources that I know I'm not going to get sued for using them. And as far as sampling into software, I tend to just use my DAW. I just chop it up in that and put it in there, and then add effects through that so that it works. And if I can't use that, I run it through the machine so that I get different effects available that way. I don't use a whole lot of plugins on anything though. Like, which I know it's not necessarily the subject we're talking about, but it just made me think of it. Is that I rarely use more than the distortion that's available in my DAW and the delay, reverb, and all that it comes with. Occasionally I'll run something through Audacity and put effects on it with a plugin, but usually I just use my DAW. That's it. Like, I mix everything in it. I create the stuff I'm using to mix in it most of the time. It's just it makes for a cleaner workflow for me, especially considering the massive library of royalty-free samples that I have. I've just got thousands upon thousands of things in folders. And they're arranged by source, not by what sounds they are. Because they were automatically arranged alphabetically. So if I got it from this company and that starts with a C, that comes before whatever comes with an F. So most of them are arranged by source, and I spend hours searching, but I can do whatever I need to without going to a whole lot of hardware or other software. So sampling is I feel like it's easier that way. You don't have to worry about learning a piece of hardware or another piece of software. You can figure out how to do it all within the software that you already use. And with as little processing as possible, and still get an original sound out of it.
Cool. Thanks, man. I want to just touch on that after Alex. Please go. Thank you, Vince.
Yeah, first of all, I want to continue with what Vince said, because if you don't have the money for hardware, you can get totally creative and unique results using software, but you just have to think outside the box and maybe swim against the stream. With hardware, I think it's a bit easier, but you still can do that with software. Even some people who begin to make same music with hardware because they're using the same hardware in the same way, but that's beside the point. And also, I think the reason why the old sample library sounds a bit better is because then the memory was so limited that every bit was important and valuable. So they had to use samples that were like the absolute bangers for their libraries. And I also have a further question regarding maybe how one would organize maybe a DAW session for mass sampling, like multiple bass drums from, or like percussion from kitchen appliance and so on, and cut it in mass and make it like most efficient. If somebody has some input, it would be great.
Can I ask you, when you say, what do you mean by that? Do you mean by the actual file management or the naming process? How do you mean?
Yeah, both the naming and also like maybe I take a bunch of kitchen appliances, take my microphone, and systematically bang one after the other and make like a big project. So if I'm in the mode, I don't have to run out to the kitchen and sample something, and when I'm done, I'm out of the flow. So I have like a couple of samples that I can pull in the moment and maybe waste through that quickly, because I tried to do it, but I sort of got lost in the source.
Okay. I'm going to touch on that example because like the first thing, I was just making a note to sample on your DAW. If you don't have a sampler, just use your DAW and, you know, cut it up accordingly. One really fun thing about, a fun thing you can do is get like you might have a snare sound that you bang in a pot. And when you bang a pot, if you have a rubber tipped hammer, a rubber tipped stick, or wrap some gaff tape around the stick, just because when a wooden stick hits a metal hammer, it's making a lot of harmonics and loud harmonics, and it's super easy to distort that. So when you record it, it's gonna sound like this. You're not gonna hear the doink. But did that make sense? Yeah, just mute it the tiniest amount. And the trick is also when you bang it as hard as you fucking can, because the harder you hit it, the more harmonics it's going to reach out of the thing, and those harmonics make it sound aggressive and ka-chang. A fun thing to do on that really quickly is you might have kitchen pot, and you might bang it 5 times, and you will use each of them as a snare. So you'll go to the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, back to the first one. And the trick is you use a prime number, like 5 or 7 or 11, because they're not going to be always falling on the same beat each time. It's going to give it this really neat organic sound. The way I do stuff, me personally, with file managing these things, is I'll name it snare or scrape. And I'll keep it like SNR, really short, because a lot of the samplers only have 8 letters because it's DOS. Really short. Snare, then the number, not 1, but 01. SNR 01 - pot. So it's a snare sound that's coming off a pot. Or this is a snare sound that's coming off a gate. Or this is the snare sound that's coming off the door. So when you're looking for your snares, they're all going to be alphabetical. Whole bunch of snares, and then a whole bunch of different things that they came off. So instead of going through all of these higgledy-piggledy things, everything's lined up. And you just have to decide on, you've got snares, you've got hats, you've got kicks, you've got toms, you've got atmos, you've got zaps. And do you have zaps and zoinks, or is it just a zap? Stuff like that, because before you know it, it's just going to get crazy. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, partially. Another aspect is maybe how to distribute it on tracks if you record inside the DAW. But
how do you mean?
You could make one big track with each sample after each other, or you make like for each sample a separate track.
I put it all on the one track. So all of that snare sound is going on track 5. So if that's what you mean, I don't put the first track, first snare on that one, the second snare on that one. It's like a constant thing. Partly for simplicity, and partly I don't want to let myself have that much control. Just me personally. Somebody else might. But I don't know. The more grit and chaos, I just think personally, the better. I'm gonna yield the floor to Rob because he probably has some excellent advice as well. Rob, go.
Yeah, Vincent, organizing samples by source is exactly what I do. So, for every sample that I have here, I have a folder by that name, and everything is underneath there. So I want to always know where to go get it, how I got to that effect, and how I would reproduce it using another sound source in that same sampler. Because there are characteristic sounds that I always get from one device and not another. If you're like me making loops back in the 80s and the 90s, you're probably familiar with some of these things that you get stuck on the front of magazines, and you can still buy them on magazines on eBay. And when you get hundreds of these, and I kid you not, I've got hundreds of these, you're basically paying $1 for a gig of samples. That's what it works out to be. And that's pretty good. You don't have to buy hardware if you can get the Mini Moog 7 gigabyte disc from the cover of Magazine X, and you're paying $1 a gig, because it costs about $7 for a decent magazine with the disc on the front. And that's really good value, and it's fun to go through. The nightmare that it creates is that you create, no shit, terabytes of samples that you will never use.
Yeah.
And the problem there is you have to catalog it somehow so you can always access and find it. So if I'm looking for something in the key of F, and it's going to be a bass guitar and it's going to be funky slap, how the hell am I going to find that vibe by source? I'm not. So what a lot of the sound design folks use is a catalog. I've mentioned Soundly before, Soundly. It's a bit of a premium cataloging method where everything is tagged, and all consumers in the professional industry can find your content by just searching on a meta tag. So when you've got a WAV file, you go to the file properties, you can add in kind of like your hashtags on it, and the catalog engines will find those. I really recommend the ADSR's Sound Manager. It's free. The Sample Manager, it's free. If you ever buy a single plugin from them on their website, they will give you the ability to download ADSR Sample Manager for free. And the metadata includes, the same short and sweet titles that Karl was mentioning, because some devices are limited. It'll have the beats per minute, the key that it's in, and some other tags like drums, melodic, break, riser, kit, that sort of stuff. And it makes it really easy to find in their sample manager, because you can go and sort and filter by those tags. So I would recommend going to the ADSR Sample Manager, but if you're serious about sound design, then check out Soundly. Other than that, however you create your hard drive repository, and I've got a separate server which is just storage of samples, you've got to make it easy for yourself, and don't waste time trolling through thousands of samples that you'll probably never use. And I tend to create what I want more than go dig up what I had, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Rob. Just if I can really quickly go, what he said, because the problem with all of these sounds is it's like, I'm in the zone, man, I'm making my music, I'm in the zone, let's go find the sound, half an hour, you're out of the zone, and it feels like you're doing your taxes. I think that's why I hate computers, is they get me out of the zone, and I feel like I am doing my tax. But that's just me. It might not be the same for everyone else. I've got a selection of old drum machines that I've put on the Patreon. I always go back to the SP12, SP1200, the Lindrum, the KR55, boom, and obviously the 909. But like Rob said, the going through samples I don't actually enjoy it. That's where I'll leave it. Alex, go.
Yeah, I myself personally got a bit burned by sample libraries, because I bought one when I was like 16 or 14 even. And then after years, I realized that on the back it said, not for commercial use. And I thought like, why did I buy it then even? And also sometimes, even if you have the right to use them, the stupid copyright systems will pick up, hey, it sounds a bit like the other track, which also had the right to use the sample, but because the copyright system doesn't understand that you have the right, you sometimes get flagged, and that's why I'm a bit scared of using very obvious loops and samples. But that's just me personally.
Cool. Yeah, scares the shit out of me. Eric, Vince. Hi, Eric. How you doing?
Yeah. You're talking about sample libraries and having an issue with running into copyright stuff, and also, finding out they're not for commercial use. Cymatics.fm. It's they're based in Atlanta, and that's where most of my samples come from. They're all royalty free. If you sign up for their mailing list, they will give you tons of free shit all the time. Like, I just got a $10 gift card for them. I've never spent money on them, and I have got hundreds of gigs of samples. And they're all royalty free, cleared for use by anyone. Do whatever you want with it. So it's an incredibly useful source. They do mostly hip hop samples and EDM stuff, but you throw some distortion on that and a little reverb, and you get what you need out of it anyway.
Awesome. Thank you. Adam, what you got?
Well, I don't want to drive too hard down my fight with the DMCA and all that. In my opinion, sampling is fair use, but there are a great deal of license-free sample libraries out there, and some of them go back to the pre-DMCA days as well, and are still under different licensing criteria, so you can actually get some of those good classic breaks that way. That said, when I'm releasing my original material, I'm very careful about what I use for sampling, because the rules are kind of different for different things. Like, you can always sample the news, but using pieces of other recordings is you definitely get into some gray area. So if you are doing stuff that contains samples, if you are, I make music that is made of samples. It's sampledelia, right? And anything that I do like that, I do it out of love, and I don't expect there to be a commercial product out of that. I make it so that I can spin it. I make it so that it's free, so other DJs can spin it, whatever. If I'm making music that's like my own songwriting stuff, though, I don't use samples that could potentially have any kind of licensing issue. If you're making original music and you plan to release it, commercially, it's safer just not to use samples that are not your own, like, it's safer not to use samples from any previously recorded music, let's put it that way. That said, we were talking a few minutes ago, I had to run downstairs for a moment because of other stuff going on, but I wanted to grab a couple of these records to show you, Rob. This one's one of Woody's, and this one is made for Tone Play, so it's got lots of cool samples on it. It's blue, it's beautiful. This is kind of that newer school kind of thing. So there's harmonica on here, there's piano, there's organs, clavs, all kinds of cool stuff. Doesn't want to go back in. Then we have stuff that are your classic, like these babies, man. Always get two. These are cool because they are made for DJing, and they have what are called skipless samples. So it's based on the geometry of the record, so it repeats in a loop, like, it's fresh, it's fresh, right? And that way, if you're performing on it and you're scratching and the needle jumps over a groove, you're still in the same place, and that's a pretty cool feature on those. Some of them get real fancy. This one has a great deal of different grooves on it, so it has like Latin grooves and different like some of it's like just bass lines, that kind of thing. And this one is a real freaking gem, and it looks like junk. It's not a pretty record, but I want to point out that's DJ Swamp right there. If you ever want to see some of the most amazing old school scratching, check out DJ Swamp. The stuff that he made these records to, perform with for, DMC championships in the late 80s and early 90s. And these things are fucking gold. These are some of the most amazing scratch records for recomposing using turntables. And now I'll shut up again.
But that's okay. Hi, welcome back. So yeah, awesome. So that's the rabbit hole of sampling, and it goes so much further. I want to touch on sound design because it came up briefly. So how do you use your sampler, whether it's hardware or software, to create new stuff? And when I say sound design, I'm kind of hinting towards spooky stuff. Because we all love sampling those bits of movies and having a long intro like Frontline Assembly. But if you were going to create something yourself, how do you go about doing that? Alex, go.
Oh, there are lots of ways. I think one of my favorites is just modulating the pitch. And also, if you have a loop, then just cutting it up into pieces and rearranging it, sending it through effects. There's a whole... And also making really short loops and using it as a pseudo synthesizer waveform. That's also one of my favorites. Some samplers even let you change the start position so you can like move through the sample in a pseudo granular way. It's really great.
Cool. Thank you. Adam.
Alex, there are entire genres of music that are based on doing exactly what you say, like, the drum and bass and jungle stuff, very, very heavily based in a couple of breaks, the most popular being the Amen break or Amen break. Look it up. And in New Orleans, the bounce music, right? All of the bounce music is based on a couple of breaks that the DJs just all recut, which, by the way, is why things like the DMCA kill creativity, but we're not running down that rabbit hole. One of the things that I was just thinking, Karl, is using samples in kind of unusual ways to create texture. Control voltage is a great way to do that. So you can run. One of the things that I've done in Reason is I will take a beat loop. Now I can take like a classic beat loop, like I could take James Brown, Funky Drummer loop or whatever, right? Clyde, right? Clyde Stubblefield, babies, and load that into the sampler, right? And then route the control voltage out of that to a drone, and now I've got a pattern, based on how much I set that sensitivity, right, for the sound pressure for the control voltage. Like I can now turn a drone into by fucking with the knobs and perhaps recording automations. So there's one way to use a sampler in a whole different way. So you're not even actually using the sample itself. You're just using the sample because you like the thing it does. And Karl being the master of vocoding, right? There's another thing that you can do with your sampler is turn that into one or the other. You can use it on either end of the vocoder, right? You can use the sampler to be the carrier, or you could use the you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, so just ideas to use your sampler in a way that's not the out-of-the-box recommended way to use it. Like set it up and use it so that it's controlling something else. And even then, mix it together. If you've got a cool rhythm and then you run that rhythm through your sampler and out into, you know, through your control voltage or whatever, and you mix those two things together, then you've got a rhythm that has a line on it that's locked to that rhythm. So even when the rhythm changes and there's fills and that kind of stuff, you're still on the same, you know, like, you know. So one of the things that's cool in Reason is that you have multiple banks in your samplers for your loops, so you can be like loop 1, loop 2, loop 3, loop 4, duk, 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 right, on your control surface, or you can set it up as automations to, you know, go to this loop, go to that loop, go back to this loop, take that loop, chop it in half, slow it down, all the automations. So if you run out through the control voltage from that sampler to another instrument and use it to control that instrument, it will always be locked to your sample loops.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Vince.
Oh, yeah, I remember now. I got listening to Adam. I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, I had a question for Adam, actually, because you mentioned, you know, sampling is fair use, and I tend to agree, but here's the issue that stops me from doing the kind of sampling I want to do, is that I don't know if I can get away with it, because technically I don't want to use the sample as it is ever. Like if I use a piece of someone else's anything, I don't want to take that and put it in at the same rhythm or, you know, with the same flow even. I want to slow it down, stretch it out, and add effects to it so it turns into something else entirely, or speed it up so it's just a single beat that used to be 16 beats. So I don't know if I can get away with that. Like, if you do that, is anybody really going to notice? If you sufficiently mangle the sound, is anybody going to realize that came from something else?
Sometimes, yes. Well, that's kind of one of the challenges that we face right now with the thumbprinting and that kind of stuff, like Audible Magic. So, so the short answer is no. Like, well, you know, the real, boy, it is a rabbit hole, and I'm really happy to run down it. I know
I'm not.
I know that's.
I want to talk about sampling, and I want to talk about sound creation. That's what I want to talk about now, Vince. I don't want to like
the short answer. The short answer is don't release it commercially if it has a piece of another recording in it. Technically, with fair use, transformative. It doesn't affect the sale of the original product, all that kind of stuff. But the bots are going to get you.
The laws that are going to fuck you up have not been written yet. So
they haven't been fixed yet either.
If you, and that's why I don't want to talk about this, is because I am not a copyright lawyer. No one here is a copyright lawyer. If we are up to par on what's going on, it's only as of the last few hours, and everything is changing all the time, which is why I am pushing so hard that every sound you create is specifically your content you have created with a synthesizer or a microphone. Because the ability to detect this stuff at different pitches, and that one's bitten me in the ass, is getting better and better and better. So man, I don't want to close you down or anything, but I wanna focus on sound design and sound creation specifically for this reason. Did I do that? No, my mic was on. Alex, go.
First of all, yes, Adam, I'm a huge fan of drum and bass. But also, I think you don't even have to stop with breaks. If you just, maybe if Vincent plays, improvises like 4 bars, you can just cut it up and rearrange it. And my sampler even has like an automated function for it. You can just say, okay, this is 4 bars, cut it into 64 or 32 slices, and randomly rearrange them. Then you can just pick and choose, I like this part, I copy that over, and maybe change it up. And that's like a huge source of inspiration. Just your own shit mangled randomly, and then you just choose the best parts to base your track on, and so on. And also, like, it's obvious, but playing something at a much lower pitch also is like huge transformation and makes it immediately scary for most
Perfect. Thank you, man. Grim, what you got?
Hey, so we were talking about creepy shit. I think a lot of the records that I love the most have something to accent what that song is going to be about, or something to put like at the heads or the tail of the song, if that makes sense. Like you may have a really unsettling, there's an artist I love that goes by Skinned. It's SKYND. But all of her songs are anchored in true crime. But you'll hear something unsettling like a pot rattling on the stove. But then if you know the context of the song and you know what it's based on, it's really, really unnerving. So I think use that to your end, if that makes any sense. I mean, if you want to string it along in a song and use those samples or use those Foley sounds or whatever you have to help drive that idea home, I think that's really badass. But I also agree with slowing things down. There's 3 iterations of an old song that I originally just thought was like an 80s fluke, and it's I Got My Mind Set on You. And one of them is very fast-paced 80s pop. One of them is very slow, and it's slower. It's a 30s swing song because that's where it originated. But then there's a very creepy song that plays maybe at about a quarter speed that they use to accent a trailer. So, yeah, I think if you're trying to find creepy, a lot of it is just in the discordant and what would normally be regular pace but slowed down. And then also just putting something out there, if you guys are interested in doing samples, if you want creepy voices and stuff, I'm the guy that does things.
He's bloody good at it.
I got a bunch of creepy reapers, so if you guys want a cool vocal range, I'm more than willing to take a crack at it. I love voice acting, and Karl's helped me a great deal with that, so fuck yeah, if you need it, I'm down.
Actually, I'm just going to interrupt just there. If you have a sample that you can't get cleared or whatever, get Grim to do it. And throw it into your music, cover it in Vinyl Crackle or whatever you want, and sit it in there, because he's bloody good at it. Thanks for that. Rob, what you got?
I think we're talking about what we use to make things creepy and sound design. I do a lot of sampling of real world sounds, and it's part of that randomness and the ability to record something unexpected, which really helps. So it's not starting from basic synthesis, it's just starting with a pre-recorded sample from a weird thing. I was at my daughter's place a little while back, and I recorded creaking dishwasher noises and air conditioners in the lift and all sorts of wild stuff, and it gave me combinations of frequencies and harmonics that I would never even think of making on a synthesizer. Yeah, you could make them, but I would never think of it, and it was just easy for me to capture those sounds. I've also recorded a lot of other industrial machine noise. I work at a facility that has aircraft, so I can record aircraft, and when I do that, I use plugins in my DAW to process the shit out of those sounds. Some of the examples I use, OVOX stereo is a great plugin. I use parallel particles stereo, and I don't necessarily use the stereo output. I might just use one channel. Enigma is also good. I use some of the plugins for Complete, and they make some really cool dark genre plugins, Atheos, Limerence, Saw, and they'll just give you 2 knobs, and one of them will be called Crackle and the other one will be called Murder or something like that, and you just play with those 2 knobs and you get some really cool sound effects out of those. Obviously Complete is a premium product and it costs money and all that sort of crap, but honestly they do make really good quality stuff. The other really cool one that I use, which is a wavetable, is a Metafilter stereo. That thing kicks ass. It's got basic analog control inputs, and it's got a sequencer which controls the wavetable, and you control the sequencer very, ad hoc, however you want to control it. And as a plugin, that thing is kick-ass. It completely changes the way that the original sound sounded, which is great because you always want a surprise. And the presets in it, I would say 30% of the presets are mind-blowing. You've got to work the basic dials to really find the sweet spots for your sample, because it'll look at harmonics, it'll look at Nyquist, it'll look at all sorts of stuff that's going on, and it'll build it out into a table. So whenever you do a single pass on it, the color of that sound changes over time, and you can change, you know, the duration as well. So I always use DAW plugins to muck with my samples for sound design. Over.
Beautiful. Thank you. Alex.
Yeah, just to add on it, reversing is also powerful, and extreme hyperpass filtering, so you just have the air portion of your sample. And maybe a quick anecdote, I was taking part in a challenge where you had only a speech sample and had to make an entire track out of it just by picking parts of the sample and resampling it and twisting it. And I did not win, my track wasn't the best, but I learned a lot just by making snare drums out of just looking for the noisy part in the speech and looping it, and maybe taking some part with not so much overtones and pitching it, falling down to make a kick drum. So it was like, you can do a lot if you just have the creativity.
Brilliant. Thank you. Adam, I'm going to go after you. Please, go.
I was just thinking about, you know, the field recordings there, like what Rob was saying about, you know, getting cool field recordings. There's a lot of that kind of stuff in sound libraries that are available too. On the Skeleton Closet record, I use a rainstorm through one of the songs as a pad, and that was a very good way to give emotional depth, an emotional anchor to the mood of the song. Finding cool sounds. So one of my tracks, Nevermore, it's the sound of a marble in a glass bowl, tap, 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 and like, you know, right? And I turned that into like, I was like, I want to use this stupid little recording of a marble bouncing, like, and it's just a couple of seconds long, of a marble bouncing in a glass bowl, and I built the entire song out of that. The whole idea came out of it, tapping, right, with Nevermore, tapping, and so when you listen to the track, so the way that I do the rhythm is by chopping that sample up, time stretching it, reversing it, chopping it into little bits so it becomes another rhythm in different parts. But if you listen to the track, it's got that stupid little marble sample is like the anchor of the thing throughout the entire song from beginning to end. And the whole song, the whole idea of the song was built on the incessant tapping sound, and what can I do with this to make it sound like it's winding and doing different things and moving through the sound space and that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of what Karl is talking about when he's talking about sound construction, about sound design, right? It's not just about using the sample wholesale, but how can you create something atmospheric with it that moves the feeling of the song as well. So that's a couple examples, I think, of different ways to use samples, different ways to use field recordings. And again, there is so much of that stuff out online. Like if you use the quick plug, MTV TV. When I'm making stuff for the bumpers for MTV TV, I use a lot of stock sounds that I find on Envato, which is I use it for the stock video as well. But they have, I mean, there's all these sound designers on there, and they make these great little things like stings and crunchy, noisy sounds, and like any of that stuff, you know, you get the subscription, you can use it. And so there's a lot of cool things that you can use to create like it's like, you know, you've got the song and what the song does and the melody of the song or whatever and the lyrics of the song and whatever, but then there's all the other components about the recording that make it a track, you know, that make it a complete production. And using little stingers and zips and zings and stuff are just like cool little hooks. I mean, you know, especially when you're making electronic music, you know, there's a million little things out there, and you can just kind of run down the rabbit hole in a day and listen to thousands of little samples and be like, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool, and file away your favorites for later use, like things that you can use to transform, and, you know, and then doing those tricks, you know, like what Alex was, you know, stretching it, reversing it, and turning the rhythmic elements into rhythm, you know, or turning non-rhythmic elements into rhythmic elements, or turning rhythmic elements, non-melodic elements into melodic elements. You know, the power of sampling is extraordinary.
Thank you. I just want to throw in some bits. Get a sample and put reverb on it, thick reverb, and only use the reverb. And you get this beautiful transparent sound. And also, if the sound that you're putting into it is non-pitched, you're going to end up with something very interesting. Then drop that several octaves or distort it. A fun thing to do next time you're around a piano is hold down a chord. Don't let the hammers strike the strings. Just gently hold down a chord so they come off. Then hit your then scream into the piano. And what's going to happen is that those strings are all going to vibrate. Your scream is going to make them vibrate because sound da-da-da. And they will actually vibrate based on whatever keys you are allowing. Because a piano is basically a great big multiple spring reverb. So you can get those strings replicating the harmonics of the tonalities of your voice. It's a most lovely thing. Another great thing to do is there's a form of synthesis that's based on a bucket brigade delay, a BBD. I don't remember what the hell it's called. I should know, but I don't. That's the one. Yeah. Thank you, Alex. You'd know. It's a fantastic form of synthesis because when you start throwing tiny slithers into a bucket brigade delay, regular delays are fine, but there's something about a bucket brigade that's even better. You start creating these really whack sounds, and its harmonic response is nuts. Really interesting. So also, I saw the most wonderful thing. I won't worry about that. The whole idea of trying to put a demon into every song is something I've always loved doing, and everybody's eyes just lit up when I said that. The idea of there's something creepy behind the song, and that might be, you know, it could be footsteps or a door creaking or somebody whispering something, not a part of the lyrics, but just something in there that is. You set up your mic, you go into the next room and you say something, you yell something out, turn it the fuck down, set it in the mix, and I guarantee you, when people are hearing, they'll look around, they'll think there's something there. Using these things to add to the fear factor, the terror factor in the song, because we're just fucked up people and we like doing that. It's always really good fun to build an instrument as well. And all you need is a piece of wood and a piece of string and a couple of nails, and you can start building things, and you can sit a pen on it, ring, do all sorts of really fun things with the pitch of it or the non-pitch of it. You can wrap screws around the strings so the screws and the washers also vibrate, so it becomes kind of like prepared. One of my favorite sounds is somebody once sent me them. They shut this window in an old house, and because you remember those old windows used to have springs in them, and those springs would help you open them. As they pulled it down, it screamed, and the springs reverberated with the tone that was being caused, created. So they were doing a spring reverb And it's the most amazing, terrifying sound I possess. And it was recorded on someone's phone. But I use it on so many tracks because it's this really harsh sound that's got this... it screams, and it's got a tone at the end of it. Remind me to make that... To share that one. And the idea of using non-pitched sounds, Adam, you touched on this one, as pitched sounds. Because if you sample something and it's got no pitch, play da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you'll hear the pitch. And then pitch it to that sound. Play it lower, play it higher, or don't worry about the pitch. It's always good fun. And as everybody's been talking, it's fascinating how there is a universe of sound in a slither. In a moment of sound, you can extract and explore a universe. And I'm not talking about a bar sample. I'm talking about a couple of milliseconds. And it's just one of those things that blows it's a meta thing that blows my mind. I thought I'd throw it out there. We're getting up to time. This has been great. If anybody has any last minute comments or anything like that, I'd love to hear before we right on over to MTV TV. Then Brian's got Space Couch at 12 or 3 o'clock New York time. And then Queen of the Static Opera is doing a Twitch at 2 p.m. New York time, LA time, or 5 p.m. New York time. But I throw does anybody have any final thoughts of life?
I like the idea of pooling some audio together and maybe sending some vocal samples to the Mr. Reaper. I'm intrigued by that. So let's maybe do that in the Discord or something like that, and so we know where to dump the stuff and give you some time to play with it. That'd be cool.
Great. That would be really fun. I'm all about it. Does anybody else have anything that they want to throw in there, or have we achieved happiness? Eric, you've been so loud today.
I don't really have much to say about. I don't sample much.
Right.
I use mostly all just instruments and butcher those up, and I mean, I guess it would be sampling, but it's already in there. I don't do much sampling.
All right.
No, I don't have much to say really about it, but very intriguing. Thank you all. I've actually learned a lot because I don't.
So Eric, we just want you to sample some hysterical laughter for Grim.
Right now.
Whenever you're ready.
That was, yeah. Oh, Karl, that look. What?
No, that was my smile. My mind was just going to where that could go. That was kind of like, that was lovely. Bit of evil.
Little evil.
Bit of evil.
We could do a session where each of us does this crazy laughter and then break, and then the next person break, and then the next person, and just record it all for Grim so you can go to town.
There you go.
Cool. All right. I'm going to close this down. I'm going to stop the stream, and we're going to rate to MTV TV. We might hang around back here for a bit and chat and just hang out. So thank you for watching, and let's rate to MTV TV. Bye. 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 Bye.